Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the free legal advice show on British Muslim TV. I'm your host Ilyas Bulbulia and I'll be with you for the next hour. As our regular viewers are aware, the free legal advice show provides you, our viewers, the opportunity to call in and ask us any questions that you have on any aspect of English law. On the show, I should be able to cover a vast, diverse range of matters ranging from immigration law matters, family law matters, criminal law matters. So whatever your questions are, whatever your legal questions are, please feel free to get in touch with us. Two ways you can get in touch with us. One is on the landline number, which appears at the bottom of the screen. You can give us a direct call on that. Or alternatively, another popular method by which you can get in touch with us is to send us a WhatsApp message on the mobile number, which appears at the bottom of the screen. A couple of minor points before we get going. Obviously, on a live show, it's not possible to take very detailed information from viewers who call in. Sometimes matters are quite complex and it's not possible to take quite detailed instructions. Now, if it's the case that your matter is complex, or if it's the case that I need to look at documents before I can advise you further, then I will request that you leave your number with the control room and I will give you a ring off air, and then we can have this more thorough discussion with you off air. I can have a more detailed discussion. I can look at your documents as well. And as always, it's part of the free legal advice show, the service that we provide, even if it's off air, even if I need to advise you in depth or I need to look at your documents, we will be able to do that free of any charge whatsoever. So as always, to get in touch live today is to ring us on the landline number. And you can, as always, continue to send in your messages on the mobile number. Now, as we've come on air, we've got a number of questions coming in on WhatsApp. Fantastic. Sometimes legal matters are confidential. People don't necessarily want to come live on air. So it's absolutely fine. You can send us a message via WhatsApp. I'm going to get to the message that we've received on WhatsApp, but let me just take the first call for the day. Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Wa Islam.
Ji, thank you. Alhamdulillah, good. How are you? You okay?
I'm fine.
Good, good, mashallah. Thank you very much for calling. Brother, what's your question?
My question is regarding that I have recently come to UK on spouse visa.
I understand. Okay.
So right now I was back in Pakistan. I was doing practice in legal practice.
I understand.
I was in legal practice.
Right, right. Okay. Okay.
So here I just want to know, either I have my degrees, those are also have been ratified by the UK NORIC as well.
Okay, I understand.
So to be a qualified solicitor, what I need to do further?
Okay. Okay.
Should I have to do like SQE, or I am exempted from it?
So that normally there are two things that you've got to do normally. And these two things can normally be done if it's done full time over 2 years. One is normally to do a certain core subjects. So it could be contract law, criminal law, tort, etc. There's certain core subjects that you can study compressed over a period of 1 year. The second thing is to do the what used to be called the legal practice course, where they teach you about law in practice. So normally, if you have another qualification, that's what people normally do. A compressed course which covers the core legal subjects, and then the next year, the second year, you do a 1 year course where you deal with actual legal practice. You know, the core issues such as accounting, ethics, etc., advocacy, certain skills are taught. That's what you normally do when you've got another degree. Now, I don't know whether you can, there is another method of qualification. That's where it's a foreign lawyer qualifies in the United Kingdom. To be quite honest, I'm not sure whether there's a quicker method to qualifying if you're an experienced foreign lawyer. But the normal route generally is, instead of doing a 3-year degree, you do the core subjects over 1 year, and then the following year you do the practical course the following year, advocacy, ethics, etc. That's what normally graduates do, where they graduated in a non-legal subject, or they've come from abroad and they've got a degree, so they don't need to do the whole degree again. They can do the compressed legal course and cover the core subjects in the first year and practice in the second year. Now, I don't know whether with your experience, you can be exempt from anything or not. Normally, the best thing to do is to go onto the SRA website, the Solicitors Regulation Authority. They normally, it's either that website or the Law Society website. They normally provide you with information as to the quickest way of qualifying in the UK with your legal background and with your experience. But thank you very much for that call. Now, as always, to get in touch with us live on air, you can ring on the landline number which appears at the bottom of the screen. Alternatively, you can send us a message on the WhatsApp number, which also appears at the bottom of the screen. Let's look at the next question that's come in on WhatsApp. Let me read the question out and then let's see what the position is. Now, this appears to be a question about self-employment. Question is, I wanted to, if I am self-employed, what counts as gross or net pay? So it must be to do with a spouse application. So if I am self-employed, what counts as gross or net pay? I'm self-employed, doing the accounts myself, but I get paid by the City Council as a carer for my brother. The annual amount I receive is £15,252. Does a cash in hand job count to make up the remaining amount? It must be really to do with a spouse application where somebody's looking at meeting the financial requirement in relation to a spouse application by demonstrating that the sponsor in the UK is self-employed. So as our viewers might be aware, in terms of sponsoring a husband or wife to come to the UK, there is a financial requirement that needs to be met. That can be met in various ways. Somebody might be employed, somebody might be self-employed, somebody might have other types of earnings. Here, the particular question is that the person who appears to be sponsoring somebody to come to the United Kingdom is self-employed. And the question that's been posed is, what's the figure that will be looked at? What's gross pay, net pay? Well, normally, if you look at the accounts, you normally get a turnover figure, which isn't really relevant for our purposes. Then you get a gross profit figure. Again, that's not really relevant for our purposes. It's not the gross profit that you look at. What you actually look at is the net profit. So on a set of accounts, it's normally the last figure on the profit and loss account. So it's the figure which you come up with after the expenses for the business that you're operating have been taken off. So, for example, if you operate a takeaway and the turnover figure is going to be the amount of sales that you have, but then you've got to take off your expenses such as gas bills, electric bills, food costs. It's the figure that you end up with. It's the net profit. That's what the Home Office will take into account when assessing whether you meet the requirement or not. But I'll look at this in greater detail after I've taken the next call. Hello, Assalamu alaikum.
वालेकुम सलाम। रस भाई, मेरे दो क्वेश्चन है
जी।
एक है कि क्या कि पाकिस्तान से वर्क परमिट से आदमी मंगवाना, उसका क्या तरीक़ेकार है
जी,
और दूसरा एमएसटी के बारे में बात पूछनी थी। क्या अभी तक कोई आई है, नहीं आई? क्या कि वो जो बोलते थे भाई 1 लाख सिग्नेचर चाहिए, वो तो कंप्लीट हो गया, तो आगे कोई प्रोसीजर कोई आ रहा है, नहीं आ रहा, कोई इसके मतलब आपको?
जी, तो भाई साहब, आप जो एमनेस्टी के बारे में जो पूछते हैं ना, एमनेस्टी के बारे में, तो जो बंदा यहाँ है वो कितने साल से यूके में है?
वो तकरीबन 12-13 साल से है।
12-13 इयर्स हो गया। और उसका कोई शादी हुई है, वाइफ है, बच्चे हैं, ऐसा कुछ है यूके में या अकेला है?
उसकी वाइफ है और एक बच्चा भी है।
जी, ठीक है, ओके। तो उसकी जो वाइफ है वो ब्रिटिश है या वो बाहर से है?
नहीं, ब्रिटिश नहीं है।
और ब्रिटिश नहीं, वो बाहर से है। जी,
ब्रिटिश नहीं है
जी। और जो बच्चा है वो बच्चा यहाँ बोर्न हुआ था?
यह बच्चा यहाँ बोर्न हुआ।
बच्चे की एज क्या है?
बच्चे की एज तकरीबन हाफ बस 2 ईयर यानी 2.5 साल
अभी छोटा ही है अभी जी
ये छोटा है
जी समझ गया उसने कोई एप्लीकेशंस डाले ऐसा कुछ हुआ कोई एप्लीकेशंस
नहीं अभी तक कुछ भी
अभी तक नहीं डाला है जी ठीक है सो वो अभी 12-13 साल से रहते हैं शादी भी हुई है यहाँ बच्चा भी है मगर छोटा है वो
एक बच्चा भी है
जी वो समझ गया मैं
दूसरा मेरा सवाल यह है पाकिस्तान से वर्क परमिट से आदमी मंगवाना उसका क्या प्रोसीजर है
जी
दोनों क्वेश्चन का आंसर देना प्लीज
जज़ाकल्लाह थैंक यू वेरी मच आपका कॉल के लिए इंशाल्लाह अभी मैं वो आंसर करता हूँ थैंक यू वेरी मच okay so 2 questions being posed by the viewer who's called in obviously the question was put in Urdu the first question relates to what the system is for sponsoring somebody to the United Kingdom under the work permit scheme or what's now known as the skilled worker scheme. Second question relates to amnesty and what the latest is on amnesty. Is there going to be an amnesty? Amnesty obviously deals with people who have been living in the United Kingdom unlawfully. They're now illegal. There's always been talk about some kind of amnesty coming in, which would mean that those who have overstayed would be able to regularize their stay in the United Kingdom. So what's the current position in terms of amnesty? I got some further details from the viewer about the circumstances of the person who's overstayed. Person has a partner in the UK, partner isn't British, there is a child from the relationship, the child is 2 years old, and again, the child is not British. But let me deal with this very quickly in terms of the amnesty point. We're going to be going to a break soon. As far as the amnesty is concerned, to be quite honest, there is no firm proposal at all in relation to an amnesty being introduced. There was talk 3-4 years ago by Boris Johnson that there might be an amnesty introduced. But since then, certainly in the last 2 years, there's been no suggestion that an amnesty will come in. We'll look at other options in greater detail after we come back from our short break. There's quite a few issues that have come up from the last questions. We'll look at that after we come back in the next couple of minutes. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the Free Legal Advice Show on British Muslim TV. I'm your host, Ilyas Bulbulia. To get in touch with me live on air, please ring on the landline number which appears at the bottom of the screen. Alternatively, you can send us a WhatsApp message on the mobile number which appears at the bottom of the screen. Now, just before the break, we had a number of questions coming in on WhatsApp. One of the questions that we were looking at was in relation to which figure is taken into account where somebody is self-employed and wants to sponsor a husband or wife to come to the United Kingdom? Which figure? Is it the gross figure, the net figure, which is taken into account in terms of sponsoring somebody to come to the United Kingdom? So, as I was explaining before the break, where you have a set of accounts, what you normally look at is in terms of your business, once you pay out all your business expenses, the last figure that you're left with after your expenses are paid. So if you have a restaurant business, it's after staff costs, food costs, lighting, heating, etc. Once everything's been paid, what you're left with, the net profit that you're left with, is what the Home Office will normally take into account. Now, as far as this particular question was concerned, what our viewer was saying was this, that the person is self-employed as a carer, being paid by the City Council, annual amount being received is just over £15,000. The question that was also being put, in addition to wanting clarification as to what gross and net pay is, the question being put was, does cash in hand job also, can it make up the deficit? So if the amount that you need to get to is 18,600 and you're getting just above £15,000, so you're short by about £3,500, how can you make it up? Obviously, you've got the money coming in terms of the caring work that's been done. Well, you can make it up. You can have cash in hand job. But what you've got to remember is, in terms of the work that you do, the cash in hand work that you do, what you must remember is that once you've done the work, whatever cash you've received, you should deposit it into the accounts. So into your bank account. If it's a business bank account, you put it into your business bank account. If it's a personal bank account where you do your business banking as well, you put it in there. That actually shows somebody who looks at this later on, the immigration officer who looks at this later on, that, yep, certain amount of money has been received as a carer from the city council, and there's other money that's come in, maybe other care work done as somebody who is self-employed, or other similar kind of work has already come in. And then you can combine both, and that will be the turnover of your business. So let's say, for example, in addition to the £15,000 of care work that's been done, let's say you do an additional £5,000 of care work where you receive cash in hand. So combined, you've got a turnover, or you've received money of about £20,000. Now, you do need to take your expenses off that. Once you take your expenses off that, it may be that there aren't significant number of expenses. So it might be the expenses only come up to £1,000 a year, accountancy fees, some fees in relation to travel, etc. So once you've taken those expenses off the £20,000, the figure that you're ultimately then left with is the net profit figure. And that's what the Home Office will look at when assessing whether you meet the financial requirement or not. So that's what's actually taken into account, the actual net figure at the end. So that's what you need to be doing. Now, just a separate point, which may not necessarily be too relevant to this, but the Home Office has said that where people are self-employed and due to COVID, their income has dropped, then the Home Office is prepared to take into account the reduced income as meeting the financial requirement. So, for example, it doesn't really relate too well here, because as far as the carer work is concerned, you'd assume that the need for caring for somebody who's unwell, that would have continued throughout the lockdown period. But if you look at another type of situation, for example, somebody who's a taxi driver, or somebody who runs a retail shop where they were forced to close, or the impact of the lockdown was that there wasn't enough work coming in, there wasn't enough business, which would result in a drop, a decline in turnover, and then ultimately a drop in net profit. What the Home Office has said is, if it's the case that your income has dropped because of what we've been through last year, the Home Office is prepared to accept your reduced net profit as being sufficient and meeting the £18,600 requirement. So as far as self-employed individuals are concerned, there is hope. You've not necessarily lost the previous financial year's income. So generally speaking, if somebody is self-employed, they would be looking at submitting the profit figures for April 20 to April 21. Now, if there's been a significant drop there, you can take into account that if it's as a result of the impact of the lockdown, then it will be acceptable even if it's dropped to a figure below 18,600. So that's a slightly related point, which hopefully is helpful. Now, had a number of other questions coming in. Let's have a look at that. Next question that's come in is this, that in terms of the requirements for a spouse application, what if you're unable to get certain documents, such as your TB certificate, English certificate? Can you still apply for your spouse application? Now, common question at the moment, certainly was a very common question a couple of months ago, where somebody is applying for a spouse visa to come to the United Kingdom. There are certain documents which need to be submitted. So from abroad, your husband or wife who's coming to the UK would submit documents such as TB certificates, English certificates, etc. And there was a time last year when it was difficult to obtain these certificates. It may be because the test centres had closed, so the clinic where the TB test is done had closed, or the centre where the English test was being done had closed, or there were restrictions in terms of travel, which meant that you weren't able to leave your own town or own city and travel to these places where the TB test was done or where the English test was done. So there was a problem 3 months ago, 6 months ago, in terms of getting certain documents which were required for a spouse application. And the Home Office was actually quite flexible. If you could explain why you'd been unable to obtain the documents, the Home Office was prepared to apply an exemption. And certainly in practice, I came across cases where it had not been possible for somebody to do an English test because they weren't able to leave their city, travel to the main city where the English test centre was based. They haven't been able to do the test, and therefore they could only submit their spouse application without that test certificate. The Home Office was quite flexible and did accept that it is difficult in certain circumstances to get these documents, and the Home Office was accepting and granting visas in this kind of situation. However, what I have noticed recently over the last couple of weeks, last couple of months, is that the general approach that the Home Office is now taking is that in the majority of countries that you get spouse applications from or other types of applications from, what you're now finding is that people are able to obtain the mandatory documents. So clinics are open, test centers are open. There may be a delay of a few weeks in order to get an appointment. So certainly, if I give you an example, currently in Pakistan, to do a TB test for a spouse application, to do a TB test before the husband or wife comes to the UK, it used to be the case that you could literally book your TB test within a day or 2 days. You'd phone them up, or you would email them, and you would get your appointment date very, very quickly within the space of 1 or 2 days. Now, what I've now heard is that it is more difficult now to get these dates. So it may take 3 weeks, it may take 4 weeks. But the key point is it is possible to do these tests. And again, as far as the English test is concerned, there may be a bit of a backlog, or there may be reduced availability in terms of tests. So it might be that it's going to take you longer. But the key point is, in most countries, as far as tests are concerned, TB tests and English tests are concerned, it can be done. So the general approach that the Home Office is now taking is not to grant a visa where people haven't submitted these mandatory documents. So where people have applied and said, well, please can I rely on the exemption? I've not been able to do this. In my experience, what's happened is that the Home Office has then gone back to the person in question, the applicant in question, and said to the applicant, look, as far as we're aware, it is possible for you to get these documents. So what we want you to do is, try again. We're going to give you another 10 days, another 20 days in order to obtain these documents. So there's a much more harsher line that's been taken by the Home Office at the moment. So a lot of the concessions, flexibilities which were introduced, you get the impression now that they're trying to go back to what the original situation was pre-COVID, where you do need to meet all the requirements. Now, there is some flexibility still in terms of UK documents, where in particular, in terms of income, where people have lost jobs, where people's income has dropped because of they've been placed on furlough, they're now only receiving 80% of their pay, etc. So those kind of employment problems where there's been an impact on income, the Home Office is certainly more flexible. They're prepared to apply some concessions, such as, let me just flag them up briefly, and I will look at these in greater detail after our break. For example, if somebody has received 80% of pay, then the Home Office is prepared to accept 80% furlough pay as full pay. If somebody has had a more significant drop in income, but previously they had significant income, you could rely potentially on your previous period of employment before there was a reduction in income. So there are some flexibilities, concessions still within the immigration rules, which are taking into account the impact of COVID-19. We'll look at that in greater detail after we've taken a short break. We'll be back in the next couple of minutes. So, welcome back to the Free Legal Advice Show on British Muslim TV. Do give me a ring live and speak to me and discuss your legal questions live. Please feel free to ring on the landline number which appears at the bottom of the screen. Alternatively, you can call us on the mobile number which appears at the bottom of the screen. So, sorry, send us a message on the mobile number. Got another question coming in relating to the exam that needs to be done when somebody is extending their visa in the United Kingdom. So you've got somebody who's here already on a spouse visa in the United Kingdom. So they've got their 2.5-year visa in the United Kingdom. Now they want to extend it for another 2.5 years. So as our viewers who've been through this process will be aware, normally you need to complete 5 years in the United Kingdom before you qualify for indefinite leave to remain in the United Kingdom. So at the midway mark, once you've done 2.5 years and you're looking to extend, what is the English language requirement at that stage? Well, the way the system works as far as English is concerned and spouse applications is concerned is that there is a 3-step process. Initially, when the application is made to come to the UK, or somebody is entering the spouse route for the first time, at the initial entry stage, it is a requirement that the applicant, as a minimum, has command of English, whereby they can pass the A1 test in English. This is the most basic test in English that there is. And it's a very, very basic level where you need to have very limited knowledge of English. And from my experience, those who start learning English from scratch and they start attending classes, it would normally take them around 2 to 3 months to get to a stage where the English is good enough for them to pass an A1 test in English. That's the test that's done at the initial stage, at the A1 stage. Thereafter, once the applicant has been granted a spouse visa to come to the United Kingdom, and they've now completed 2.5 years, they're looking at extending their visa. At that stage, the test that's done is the A2 test in English. So we've gone up from A1 to A2. So we've gone up 1 stage. So instead of doing a very basic test at A1 level, after 2.5 years, we've gone up a level to A2. So that's the test which is done when you apply for an extension of your visa. You then carry on once you've got your extension granted and you've completed another 2.5 years and you've got a total of 5 years in the United Kingdom, and you're applying for indefinite leave to remain at that stage after you've completed 5 years in the United Kingdom. What's the test that you do at that stage? Well, the test is known as a B1 test in English. So we've gone from the A1 test at the initial stage, then we've had the A2 test at the extension stage. Now we've got the B1 test at the final stage. So that's the test that you do at the end. And as you progress through the different stages, the command of English that you need, that is required of you, is more onerous, is harder. B1 is a test where you need to be able to have a basic conversation in English. A1, A2, certainly even at A2 level, it's not so much being able to have a flowing conversation, just an understanding, a higher level of understanding of English is sufficient. But B1 is where you are required to be able to engage in a basic conversation. So it's not at the very low level of, saying certain sentences. You're at the stage where you should be able to engage with the person, ask questions of the person in order to ensure that the conversation continues, and likewise be able to talk about a topic of interest to you. What I always say to viewers is, if you want to know how difficult or easy these tests are, there's loads of different examples on the internet, on YouTube, and certainly within the United Kingdom. When you apply for an extension or when you apply for indefinite leave to remain, what you do is, if you need to do the test with an organization called Trinity College, and if you go onto their website, they have not only information there to help you prepare, but also they have example videos which takes you through what happens at these tests. So there'll be a video for the A1 test, A2 test, B1 test, and normally that gives you a very good idea as to what level, what command of English you are expected to have in order to pass these tests. Just a final point here is something that arose today, is that obviously we've got these tests that need to be done at these different stages. You should also bear in mind that although these tests are tests which are looking at or assessing your ability to speak English, ability to engage in a conversation, there is another knowledge test which is completely different, which is, as our viewers will be aware, the Life in the UK test. Now, that's a knowledge test. That's testing your knowledge of certain matters relating to life in the United Kingdom, hence the title Life in the UK test. So one test, the pure English test, which is at the A1, A2, B1 level, that is a test which is looking at your ability to speak English. There is a completely separate knowledge test, which is the Life in the UK test. So it's both tests which need to be done at the indefinite leave to remain stage. So somebody who's here on a spouse visa would only need to do the Life in the UK test at the very end, after they've spent 5 years in the United Kingdom. It's only at the very end that you do that test, the Life in the UK test. Hope that answers your question. Okay, let's look at a number of other questions which have come in on WhatsApp. Let me read the question out first. Question is, Assalamu alaikum. I have family issues. I came from Pakistan 21 years ago and have been married for 22 years in total. We have 4 children. Ages are 19, 15, 12 and 11 years old. We separated about 7 months ago. We tried to resolve matters, but it's not been resolved. We have 3 properties. 1 on my wife's name. 2 are on both names of my wife. So 1 is on the wife's name, and the other 2 appears to be on the wife's name, potentially with somebody else. Wife doesn't want to, the other 2 properties are on both names. The wife doesn't want to give me anything, and I am living on rent at the moment. If I take this matter to court, where do I stand? My wife has only been working for 5 years, and I've been working as a taxi driver for much longer than that. But currently, that's the position where there are 4, it's a long-standing relationship, obviously, where the parties have been married for 22 years, and there are children from the marriage as well, various ages. 1 is over the age of 18, but there are 3 children still under the age of 18. Now, we don't know where the children are at the moment. Now, there are 3 properties. Generally speaking, it's not the case that either party can simply decide not to, split the assets properly. It doesn't really matter whose name the properties are in. where the parties are married and where ultimately you end up getting divorced, in a long-standing relationship, marriage like this, it doesn't really matter who actually is the legal owner of the property. It doesn't matter whose name is on the title deeds. It could be the husband's name, it could be the wife's name, or it could be joint names. It doesn't matter. That doesn't determine anything. So, for example, if you have 3 properties, they're all in the wife's name. It doesn't mean that where there's a divorce following a long-standing marriage, that because the properties are in the legal name of the wife, she somehow has a greater share of the assets. But equally, if the properties are in the husband's name, only 3 properties, it doesn't mean that the husband has a greater share of the assets. That's not what the court looks at. The court will look at a number of factors. And certainly here, where we've got a long-standing marriage, potentially you're looking at something around a 50-50 split. So if the properties are mortgaged up, obviously the mortgages would have to be paid, properties sold, whatever is left. We're looking at the starting point may well be 50-50. Now, what makes a difference here, slight difference here, is where the children are. And here, we don't have enough information on that. But the reality is, whichever parent looks after the children will ultimately get a slightly higher share of the assets. So it may well be that ultimately, because the children, there are 3 children under the age of 18, there may not be a 50-50 split. When you look at it as a whole, wherever the children are, if mum has the children, mum might have a slightly bigger percentage of the estate. If dad has the children, then dad will have a bigger percentage of the estate. So here the key thing is, because of the number of children, because of the age of the children, there won't necessarily be a 50-50 split. Wherever the children are, that parent will have a slightly greater share of the estate. Now, it may well be that you agree that, we won't do anything at the moment. We'll wait till the children are adults. I know the youngest is 11 years old, in which case you'd have to wait another 7 years. But once the children are adults, at that stage, there's no reason why there shouldn't be, generally speaking, a 50-50 split. And we don't know the other circumstances, but in a normal situation where there are 3 properties, let's say the children were all over the age of 18, both parties have been in this marriage for a long time, normally you'd work on the basis that there would be a 50-50 split. But here, the real issue is wherever the children are going to go, that parent will ultimately end up with a greater percentage of the assets as such. Hope that answers the question. I know at the end there was a question about who's been working, who's not been working. I mean, the reality is that that may not be that significant a factor. Hope that answers the question. We're going to be taking a short break. We're going to be back in the next couple of minutes. See you then. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to the free legal advice show on British Muslim TV. To give me a ring live on air, please ring on the landline number which appears at the bottom of the screen. Alternatively, as always, you can send in your messages on the WhatsApp number that appears at the bottom of the screen. Okay, let's go to our next caller for the day. Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Ji walaikum salam. Thank you for calling.
Thank you, sir. जी मेरे 2 सवाल अगर आप आंसर कर सके regarding immigration.
ठीक है, no problem.
Yeah, question number 1 ये है कि मेरी niece, on behalf of her, she applied in this February for her naturalization.
I understand, yeah.
And then her ILR expired in March.
Okay.
So that shouldn't be a problem. You know, ये एक सवाल ही पूछना था.
जी. So niece है ना, जो niece है ना, वो niece की age क्या है?
इसकी age 9, just over 18, so 19 years old.
19 years old. Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Okay.
लेकिन उसका उन्होंने एक फरवरी में नेचुरलाइजेशन के लिए अप्लाई किया सर.
हाँ जी.
और उसका ILR मार्च में एक्सपायर हो गया. तो मतलब 1 month before she applied for naturalization. अभी मैंने केस किया थ्रू MP ना. کہ اس کا تقریباً 6 منتھ ہونے والے ہیں
جی
اور آپ نے ہمیں جواب نہیں دیا. میں نے یہ بھی
تو مگر اس کو آئلہ کب ملا تھا اس کو کہ آئلہ نہیں ملا؟
آئی ایل آر تو اس کو 2015 میں ملا تھا.
رائٹ ٹھیک ہے. تو وہ آپ جو کہتے ہیں نا کہ آئلہ ایکسپائر ہو گیا, وہ کارڈ ایکسپائر ہو گیا,
کارڈ ایکسپائر کریکٹ.
وہ تو کوئی پرابلم نہیں ہے, وہ تو ڈزنٹ.
دیٹس ناٹ ا پرابلم.
نہیں وہ تو ایرریلیونٹ ہے, وہ تو ایرریلیونٹ ہے. جی
اچھا
کیونکہ وہ تو یہ دیکھتے ہیں نا کہ آئی ایل آر ایکچولی کب ملا تھا. وہ تو کافی سال ہو گئے نا, سو کارڈ کی کوئی فکر کرنے کی ضرورت نہیں ہے, بالکل نہیں.
اچھا سر, دوسرا سوال میرا جو اسٹوڈنٹ ویزا کے بارے میں سر.
جی
جو پاکستان سے لوگ آتے ہیں.
جی
ٹھیک ہے
جی.
تو پاکستان سے جو اسٹوڈنٹ آتے ہیں تو یونیورسٹی آپ کو انکنڈیشنل آفر دیتے اور آپ پھر پاکستان سے فی وغیرہ جو شو کرتے ہیں.
جی.
تو اس کا اپلیکیشن فارم ہم یو کے میں کسی لائر سے کر سکتے ہیں؟ دیٹ ہیز ٹو بی فرام پاکستان. یہ سوال ہے.
اور یہ جو اسٹوڈنٹ کا ہے نا, وہ
جی
وہ آپ جو ویزا اپلیکیشن کی بات کر رہے ہیں نا, ویزا اپلیکیشن.
کریکٹ سر.
وہ تو کوئی بھی جگہ سے کر سکتے ہیں نا, وہ تو بہت آسان ہے نا. جو پاکستان سے کریں گے یا یہاں سے کریں گے, جو فارم تو سیم ہی ہوگا نا. وہ تو آن لائن جو گورنمنٹ کی ویب سائٹ ہے, ہوم آفس کی جو ویب سائٹ ہے, وہاں اس کا آن لائن فارم ہے نا. وہ تو کوئی بھی جگہ سے آپ ایکسیس کر سکتے ہیں اور فل کر سکتے ہیں. سو آپ جو گورنمنٹ کی ویب سائٹ پہ جائیں گے نا, اور اس میں جسٹ ایون اف یو پٹ ان اپلائی ایز اے اسٹوڈنٹ ٹو کم ٹو دا یو کے, تو وہ آپ کو لے جائیں گے. یہ جو سرچ کریں گے تو ہوم آفس کی ویب سائٹ پہ جو اسٹوڈنٹ, ابھی اس کو اسٹوڈنٹ ویزا ہی کہتے ہیں نا, تو اسٹوڈنٹ ویزا کا اپلیکیشن ہوگا آن لائن. تو آپ یہاں سے بھی اس کو رجسٹریشن کر سکتے ہیں, یہاں سے بھی پیسے دے سکتے ہیں, اس میں کوئی پرابلم نہیں ہے.
یعنی آپ لیگل ریپرزینٹیٹو یوز کر سکتے ہو؟
100%. جی 100% آپ یہاں لیگل ریپرزینٹیٹو یوز کر سکتے ہیں. اگر آپ خود بھی کانفیڈنٹ ہے کہ آپ یہ کر سکتے ہیں اور آپ کو ریکوائرمنٹس کی سب آپ کمفرٹیبل ہے, تو آپ خود بھی کر سکتے ہیں ایون وداؤٹ.
لیکن سر اس میں ایک پرابلم آتا ہے.
جی.
کیونکہ پرابلم یہ آتا ہے کہ مثال کے طور پر آپ یو کے میں جو اپلائی کرتے ہو نا,
جی,
تو ویزا آسانی سے دیتا ہے. لیکن جب آپ ابراڈ سے اپلائی کرتے ہو نا, تو وہ I'm afraid to say they're very strict. 90% they excused ہوتے ہیں, یعنی جو بیٹھے ہوتے ہیں انٹری کلیئرنس آفیسر.
جی.
آپ کی سارے کنڈیشن جنرل اسٹوڈنٹ ہوں گے, آپ کے سارے کنڈیشن فلفل ہوتے, پھر وہ ایسا بہانہ ڈھونڈتے ہیں
جی
کہ اس کو ریجیکٹ کرتے ہیں. تو اسی لیے لیگل ریپرزینٹیٹو کو پھر پتا ہوتا ہے نا. پھر اس کا مطلب یہ ہے کہ میرے خیال سے لیگل ریپرزینٹیٹو یہ ہوتا ہے
جی
کہ پھر اس کے ساتھ وہ
آگے بھی کر سکتے ہیں. جی
آگے بھی کر سکتے ہیں.
سب مگر اس میں یہ ہے نا کہ آپ وہاں سے ایجنٹ یوز کرو یا یو کے لائر یوز کرو, جو اپلیکیشن جو سبمٹ ہوگا نا, تو وہ اینڈ میں تو ہوم آفس میں سیم ہی جگہ پہ جائے گا. سو یہ جو امیگریشن آفیسر ہے, انٹری کلیئرنس آفیسر ہے, وہ تو اینڈ تو اس کے پاس ہی جائے گا نا, جہاں سے بھی آپ اپلائی کرو, پاکستان سے کرو, انڈیا سے کرو یا یو کے سے کرو. جو اسیسمنٹ ہے نا, وہ تو سیم بندے کے پاس ہی آتا ہے. مگر آپ کی بات صحیح ہے کہ اگر کوئی ایکسپیرینسڈ لائر ہے اسٹوڈنٹ ویزاز میں, تو اس کو بالکل سب کچھ پتا ہوگا نا اسٹریٹ اوے کہ یہ ایکسیپٹیبل ہے یا نہیں ایکسیپٹیبل ہے. بس سم ٹائمس وہاں اس کو اتنے ایکسپیرینس نہیں ہوتا ہے. اس کا وجہ یہ ہوتا ہے کہ انڈیا پاکستان میں جو ہے, وہ جو ایجنٹس ہوتے ہیں وہ یو کے کا بھی کرتے ہیں, کینیڈا کا کریں گے, امریکہ کا, آسٹریلیا کا. سو اس کے پاس اسپیشلسٹ اتنی نالج نہیں ہوتی ہے, ورکنگ آئیڈیا ہوتی ہے کہ یہ کیسے ہوتا ہے. اوبویسلی یو کے لائر کو تو یو کے رولس کا ہی پتہ ہوگا نا, ان یو کے اسٹوڈنٹ ویزاز کو اس کے پاس زیادہ ایکسپیرینس ہوگا نا. سو آپ کی بات تو رائٹ ہے. آئی تھنک اف یو کین گیٹ اے یو کے ریپرزینٹیٹیو, اب یو کے ریپرزینٹیٹیو یوز کر لو.
Thank you very much, sir.
جی thank you, جزاک اللہ. Thank you very much. آپ کو اللہ حافظ. Thank you very much for your question. So obviously, as we approach September, a lot of applicants from abroad are looking at applying for student visas to come to the United Kingdom. And these are busy periods, June, July, normally, in terms of student applications with a view to starting in September, October. Now, understandably, because of what we've had here, because of the lockdown that we've had here, and because a lot of universities haven't been operating normally, they've been operating remotely, we've had probably less applications for university places this year than you would normally have. But having said that, a lot of universities are now going back to normality, face-to-face teaching, etc. will start. So those students who are coming to the United Kingdom from abroad hopefully will be able to study as normal. Now, the point is, this is a busy period, and you get asked a lot of questions in terms of what the process is. You can use an agent who is abroad to make the application, and or, as the caller was asking, the alternative is you use a UK lawyer, UK representative to make the application on your behalf. Generally speaking, in my experience, student applications are relatively straightforward, because in essence that you are only demonstrating only three things that you need to be mindful of. One is you need a CAS letter from the university, the Certificate of Acceptance of Studies. Obviously, you would have gone through the university application process, you would have been successful, and the Home Office would have then issued a CAS to you. So that's the first requirement, that you are going to be sponsored by a university here in the UK. Obviously, if you haven't got the CAS letter, you can't move on to the next stage. So let's say you've got the CAS letter. So you've got the reference number which confirms that you are being sponsored to come to the United Kingdom. That's the easy thing out of the way. The next thing is you might be required to demonstrate your English ability. Different rules apply, different types of universities, different types of courses, but ultimately that shouldn't be a problem. If you are required to prove your English ability, it's relatively straightforward. You would normally sit an IELTS test, and you'd be required to get a certain level. You'd need to reach a certain level. I think it's band 4, whatever the requirement is. As long as you've done that, if you're required to demonstrate your English, as long as you've done that, you've met the English requirement as well. So one is the Certificate of Acceptance of Studies. There may be an English requirement that you need to be fulfilling. Thirdly, you need enough money. This is the main issue, enough money to cover the fees for that particular course. And if you look at the numbers now, they are quite high. A typical course, even if it's a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, an international student would be paying in the region of £14,000 to £15,000 per year. And that's why international students are so attractive to universities. It's per year they are paying £14,000 to £15,000. So as an international student applying for a visa, you would normally have to demonstrate that you've got enough money for the course. Now, let's say the course fee is £15,000 and you've already paid £5,000 to the university. Your CAS letter will confirm this, or your letter from the university will confirm this. You will then need to have, obviously you've paid 5 already, you'll need that extra 10, which covers the outstanding fee, which covers the remainder of the course. So you'll need that. So that's your course fees taken care of. In addition to that, you obviously need enough money to live on in the United Kingdom, the maintenance part of the savings. So one is enough money to pay the course fees, and the other is enough money to live on. Now, there's some different calculations there, but if and you can work out the calculations based on where you're studying, length of the course, etc. But ultimately, you're looking at having savings in the region of about £9,000-10,000 to cover your expenses in the United Kingdom, generally speaking. So this gives you a general idea. So enough money for the course fees, enough money to live on in the United Kingdom. If you add both together, you see that it's quite expensive to study in the United Kingdom. You'd need savings of about £25,000 or thereabouts in order to apply for a student visa for 1 year. The £15,000 would obviously go to the university. The remainder would then go towards your maintenance. It's a matter for you as to how much you spend, but you need to, at the outset, demonstrate that you do have enough savings to be able to look after yourself whilst you're here in the UK. And in terms of where the savings have to be, they either have to be in your own account. If you're living abroad, it could be a foreign bank account that you have. So you can have the money in your bank account personally, or it could be in your parents' bank account, your mum and dad's account. That's completely acceptable as well. So the main issue here is the amount of savings that you need in order to qualify for a student visa. So in essence, it is actually a relatively easy application. You've got your CAS letter, Certificate of Acceptance of Studies. If there's an English requirement that you need to fulfill, you've got that. And then the final bit of the jigsaw really is that you need savings, money in your account. So that's the basis of a student application. And the reason I've gone through this is if you look at the last caller's question, where we were looking at whether the application should be made abroad through an agent or whether you need a lawyer here. If you've got a good agent abroad, fine. Or if you've got an experienced lawyer here, it's fine. If not, normally in my experience, student visas are relatively straightforward. So you can, if you really want to, make the student application yourself. But there you go. That's basically how a student application is put together. In my experience, the vast majority of student applications are successful simply because they are quite simple applications, unlike other applications. That brings us to the end of the show. We're going to be off for the next couple of weeks. We'll be back in about 3 weeks' time. See you then.